For weeks, maybe months after watching this cinematic masterpiece that was Dune 2, I began having dreams of a prophecy. One that spoke of a messiah one day pointing the way to a Resident Evil and Dune collab that would lead us all to challenge paradise. Well, like the Resident Evil version of Stilgar, my faith in the prophecy had been repaid. So today, we went back into the abusive arms of the Berserker mod to attempt to beat its hardest difficulty with only our knife. And perhaps, more importantly, the belief that by the end of this crippling hell, we would arise to become the Lisan al Gaib. The village of Pueblo is so beautiful when the sun is low. Rolling over the piles of chicken shit and human excrement, you can see not really much at all. But for the village's peaceful community, cruelty would soon become all they would know. The outsiders, Los Illuminados, came, and under the cover of darkness they unearthed the ancient Las Plagas parasite from its resting place, giving the houses of Sadler and Salazar obscene power. With the entire village now under Lord Sadler's control, it was clear to him that without the Plaga, delivery of his brain rot directly into these people's minds would be impossible, making it by far the most valuable substance in the universe. Lord Sadler, though, had always been guided by the calculus of power, and the only threat to that power was the one house in the region that would not stand for this parasitic roofie, the House of Atreides. So, as per the Lord's will, in a single night, the Duke, his family, even his waifu, were no more. At least that's what Sadler had thought. One Atreides did survive. The youngest son of the Duke, Leon Atreides, had escaped the Purge. And whilst in the shadows of Pueblo lie many secrets, the darkest of them all may still remain. The path to revenge takes us straight through to the village town centre, passing Leon's family doing their best Ned Stark impression at the gate, and watching on as the last of the Atreides soldiers were used to heat up some post-genocide schmores. As we began our fight through this Michelin-star gulag, you may notice a very immediate problem with our plan. The knife's limited durability and lack of repair options outside of the merchant meant that we'd get softlocked at the cabin in Chapter 5. How could I know this? Had Leon seen it in one of his visions? No, I'd personally wasted the better part of a day trying it firsthand. As many of us know, the Berserker mod is overclocked to provide generous amounts of unhappiness, but the knife's durability doesn't scale with the mod's new difficulty curve, leaving it woefully incapable of taking on this challenge in its natural form. So with wall hacks from the future, we introduced a new set of Dune-based rules to help make this challenge possible, starting with an overhaul to the combat knife. By using a tooth from Del Lago, we could forge the legendary weapon of the Fremen, the Chris knife, which endowed the combat knife with infinite durability. Removing the possibility to become softlocked at Chapter 5 meant that we could push the boundaries of a knife-only run to never-before-seen levels, and showcase to you, the viewer, my unmatched skills with a blade. By enriching our body with the spice melange, we also introduced a completely new game mechanic to help match the impressive physical abilities of the Fremen. The ability to dodge. Now, this may seem like we'd gifted ourselves the equivalent of a full set of Exodia, but I can assure you it barely even levels the playing field against the difficulty of the Berserker mod. But to allay any concerns of improper conduct with this feature, we voluntarily submitted ourselves for a nerf by introducing a stamina bar. With this limiter, the dodge roll became something of a skilled maneuver that needed precision and timing for it to be effective. And with these two rules, we'd not only given ourselves a fighting chance of actually getting to the end of the Berserker mod with only the knife, but had given the challenge a real Timothée feel to it.
Not a fucking pussy.
And with the rules complete, so was the village, with Sadler slapping in a last-minute Teams meeting which his law-abiding workforce begrudgingly attended. With a disgusting combination thrown at the brute smuggling the windmill cog in the farm and the chainsaw lady in the basement of the fishing village embarrassed by the simple effectiveness of going up and down a ladder, we uncover the identity of the prisoner held captive inside her BDSM dungeon. Luis Serra, one of the most fiercely loyal Atreides captains who had traded the Balaset for dancing shoes, had been captured and stuffed inside this sack, ready for transportation to the chief's attic. As we freed Luis, he reveals that just before his capture, he'd grabbed something for us, something that our father wanted us to have. But before we could take it, we felt the firm, slightly arousing hand of the Los Illuminados enforcer, codenamed Big Daddy, grip us around the throat and place us inside this wall. Opening our eyes and finding ourselves still alive was a relief, but realizing we were sat in the waiting room for a 50 Shades of Grey roleplay was concerning. We break out of Horny Jail before Christian Grey returns and meet up with the Merchant. The perfect blend between Jesus Christ and Steve Jobs, he was the textbook businessman, equipping us with all of the knife upgrades, first aid sprays and pure methamphetamine that we'd need to make it through this challenge. Entering Dynamite Valley, it truly was beautiful just how much undiscovered pain an area could inflict on us when we only brought a knife. It was the kind of pain sadomasochists could only dream of, and it was only chapter 2. On our 6th time of being turned into strawberry milkshake, it had become apparent that rushing through here was not going to work as well as I'd hoped. If you loved what you accopietoed, you'd never work a day in your life, and the rocket launcher enemies were working overtime to stop us from opening the gate to get out of here. So with that in mind, we'd need to fall back to my comfort blanket strategy that has to this day never let me down. Before long, the population of the valley was placated with death, allowing us to retrieve the crank and attempt to outmaneuver the oncoming RPGs to finally open the exit gate. Despite the RPG's weirdly insufferable ability to home into our rectums, we eventually pull off a dodge that would have had Stilgar dropping another fresh Lisan al Gaib. With both gates open, we arrive at such a tastelessly decorated house that you'd be forgiven for thinking we'd arrived at an assisted living facility.
I've fallen, and I can't get up!
But this wasn't just any assisted living facility.
You picked the wrong house, fool!
Our progression to Chapter 3 was now dependent on overcoming the polyamorous throuple of the Chainsaw duo and Mendez, who were actively looking to bring another party into the bedroom. Chainsaw close quarters combat was one of the least desirable options out there on a knife-only run, but by taking a quick dose of Bradley Cooper-endorsed crack, we come up with a creative way of getting out of here as quickly as possible. By luring Mr. Steal Your Wife with those dungarees out into the bear traps I'd left behind outside, we were able to get 2 massages to the jugular in immediately to reduce the doctor's health to well below 20% straight out the gate. With a few more stabs at the door and a nice change of pace that saw Mendez's fist pile drive Dr. Salvador's face instead of our asshole, the orb to Mendez's pleasure room was retrieved, allowing us to be kicked into the start of Chapter 3. Now, releasing the dog here, whilst the ethical thing to do, would end up causing us issues later in the game. With the ability to see possible futures all at once, those futures where we save the dog would bring with it additional enemies and a big health boost to the big guy. Even though the good boy would be a hindrance, we weren't a serial killer, so we weren't just going to leave him in the trap, but we do politely RSVP no on the invite for assistance later. Doubling back to Dynamite Valley nets us the broken butterfly and some additional treasure that we can use to upgrade our knife, ready for our arrival back at the town centre. I'd probably mark the Passanta cameo down as a 5.5 out of 10 on the colonoscopy scale, but the dogs, on the other hand, were a solid 15 out of 10. Honest to God, I was convinced that the AI was just waiting for the absolute worst possible times to attack me. But even K9 Skynet wasn't invulnerable to the effects of having a knife plunged into your face. Once the process of dismantling Passanta and her shadow demons had begun, we could outsource damage to our hammer-wielding friend at the start of Phase 2, who would attempt to knock Passanta into the floor whilst we maintained a socially acceptable distance from this digital acid trip. A few resets later, and Passanta was banished back to the Shadow Realm from whence it came, allowing us to sliver our way through the underground minefield and arrive at the church. With the groundskeepers unknowingly digging their own graves, a second cemetery site would need to be opened as we awarded more nominees in the Mountainside Pass with first-class tickets to the afterlife. After making a dodge past the Chainsaw Twins using nothing but the concept of gravity again, it appeared that this was one mockery too far, as their obsession with now wanting to replace my insides with outsides far outweighed the respect that they should have had for level design.
I understood what I was supposed to do, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was compelled to stay, compelled to disobey.
With the sisters destroying the sovereignty of our save rooms without our consent, we entered the raw sewage dump that was the swamp. The plan this time really was to get in and out of here as quickly as humanly possible. Outstay my welcome would be a one-way ticket to joining the fecal matter floating around our ankles, and apart from an awkward moment getting stuck in between the doorframe with the fish room, the snatch and grab of the fuel was successful. We even bagged ourselves a secret fish charm that said... The risk, however, hadn't paid off, as the jerry can was empty. No petrol meant no boat, and no boat meant that we were stuck on this side of the lake. We'd need to think outside of the box if we wanted to progress this challenge. Chapter 4 often felt at times that we were spinning into a Valkyrie-induced Max Payne nightmare sequence, but our experience with this area pays dividends as we skip through the collection of the first head guarded by the Chainsaw Sisters by, yep, you guessed it. We then stunlocked this oversized demon on the boat in the middle of the lake, and as we completed our cleanup of the fishing village, there was a mysterious voice on the wind. Oh, it's just the cult proclaiming War Thunder the sponsor of today's video. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. With over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships, you can join a 70 million strong community worldwide in some of the most immersive combat gameplay out there. And the best part is, it's completely free to play on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. War Thunder's vehicle catalogue includes well over a century's worth of vehicles, meaning you can live out your dream of using Mike's UH-1 Huey to reenact Chapter 15. Novicidor's not included. War Thunder's attention to detail is absolutely insane. Not only can you see the exact damage done to your vehicle via their X-ray view feature, but you can spend hours tailoring your vehicle with an in-depth customization system. If you're a new player or just haven't played for 6 months, you can use the link in the description or the pinned comment for an exclusive bonus that includes premium vehicles, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium. This offer is only available for a limited time, so be sure to treat yourself, and a huge thank you again to War Thunder for supporting the channel. For us, it's time to head back into the world of survival horror. Checking the basement of the shack, we find Luis. Gone. Nowhere to be seen. We could only hope that he'd managed to escape, but we do find what he'd been trying to give us. Our father's ducal signet. With his family all F4'd, Leon had thought it would be lost forever. The ancient ring of House Atreides had been in the family for centuries, worn by every leader of the house as far back as Leon could remember. It was completely priceless.
Perfect. You're a real professional.
We commit to a quick tactical save in preparation for the second Blasphemous headers. With harpoons vetoed and enemies defying the laws of physics, it was certainly the most troublesome area on the lake. If you could somehow speedrun your way to the puzzle door, however, unlock it and draw the brute guarding the head out, another lap around the area gives us enough time to snatch the head up before sprinting back to the boat. With the lake now officially completed, you all knew what time it was.
I do not wish to be horny anymore.
With our attacher case now meeting industry criteria to operate as an independent fishmongers, we commit to a fire sale on the rest of our treasure, allowing us to fully upgrade the combat knife, endowing it with the 2x attack speed exclusive ready for the El Gigante fight. Considering this guy's toe was the size of our head, I was fully expecting to get absolutely flattened in here. But it was in fact the local collection of bumfluff here that were the ones contributing the most to my current misery. With them removed, it turns out that El Gigante's weakness was being stabbed non-stop in this reversing dump truck that he called a rear, a weakness that all of us were no doubt susceptible to. By following this pattern, it ensures that he gets stuck in an endless cycle of stomp attacks, and by simply staying in his blind spot like the rich and powerful of today's society, we were immune to the consequences of our actions. El Gigante does become slightly more fed up once his plaga is revealed, but by just running away, he'll eventually just fall to the ground by himself, clearly exhausted by our bullshit. This then allows us to jump on his back, deal out damage, and rinse and repeat until death is achieved. With our knife sufficiently sterilized and entry to the church achieved, it was clear this place was being used to hold something, or someone. And it felt like the unidentified male with full body alopecia and the skin complexion of scrambled eggs charging towards us with murderous intent was confirming our suspicions. Despite a very equal fight, having no eyebrows puts you automatically at a severe fighting disadvantage, and with him no match for our increasing skills with a blade, he vanishes like a fart in the wind before we could deal the killing blow. It was highly unlikely that a man with a forehead that big wouldn't be back again, so with a quick search of the church complete, we find what he'd been guarding. It was none other than Ashley Graham, the Emperor's daughter.
Easy with that. My name's
Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis!
With Ashley sufficiently calmed after that introduction, she reveals that as the voice of reason against murdering Leon's family, Sadler had grounded her and taken away her phone for not getting on board with the family genocide. The person Leon had just fought was the Emperor's psychotic nephew, Fade Krauser, who had in fact been one of the chief engineers of Leon's overnight transition to orphancy. With Ashley seemingly on our side, the cult's extended family made up of the worst kinds of devilry had arrived and weren't very likely to just let us both walk out of here. Now, there were two types of people in this world. Those that believed Ashley was a soggy, human-sized diaper full of white dog shit that we'd have to drag through the rest of this challenge, or those, like myself, who were proud to sit somewhere directly in the middle. For me, Ashley's presence offered several options that meant I could stomach her just slightly more than usual. Using her abductions as an unofficial Uber, it allows us to transport her through to different areas of the map on our behalf. giving us the freedom to battle through the chaos around us. Once we were done, we could just cancel the trip through the app or by knifing the driver in the back, further highlighting just how valuable these insta-kill attacks were to our progress. With this strategy, the church resistance were easily thinned out, allowing us to use the cover of darkness.
Come take a look.
Did that just happen, or am I on drugs? Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah, cover of darkness. Allowing us to use the cover of darkness and our expertly honed stealth skills to immediately alert the entire village to our presence. After stabilizing the challenge, we arrived at the crossroads of a very important choice. The merchant now has the body armor for sale, which was going to be a vital piece of equipment if Leon wanted any quality of life after leaving this place. Granting its wearer complete protection from shots and explosions and a damage reduction to all other attacks, like a limited edition Wesker body pillow, it was something we couldn't afford to live without. The only problem was that it was locked behind the exorbitant cost of 30 spinels. With us only having the knife, we were severely limited in what tasks we could complete to harvest these precious microtransactions, meaning that we'd lose the short-term benefits of these exclusive items until we could afford them. What that did mean, though, was that we'd need to maximize what tasks we could do, starting with the Savage Mutt. After discovering Mendez's human trafficking operation in his attic, the Savage Mutts end up being nothing more than a Mouse 1 simulator. Using the ancient Fedaykin technique of stabbing things really fast in the face, our attacks were so rapid that the two mutts were basically stun-locked, giving us the easiest 8 spinels we'd earn in the entire game. I had the same appetite for a sequel to the farm area as I did for Madam Web, so to spend the least amount of time here, if we can make it to the typewriter underneath the windmill, we can make a tactical save before immediately reloading it. This not only helps to reset all of the enemy positions, but it also gives Ashley time to recover from what felt like a permanent state of incapacitation. Up next, even the incoming Riz of Louise couldn't offset the sickness I felt entering the cabin. Berserker Mod cabin was a special kind of masochist vintage. Not only did we have 3 chainsaw enemies, a brute, and enough Ganados to fill a Taylor Swift concert, all packed into the size of a studio flat in central London, but do you want to know what the worst part of all of this was? There was now no timer for the cabin. My entire strategy for this dump had banked on a timer that I could filibuster, allowing us to get out of here with minimal stress. But now, we had none of that. Now, the win condition to escape from this endless cycle of BS was to defeat every chainsaw enemy and the brute. If you don't, you will never leave this place, especially not alive. And 30 minutes later, I'd found no cheats, no cheeses, and no way of getting around this steaming pile of horseshit. In any other country, this kind of abuse would equate to a civil rights lawsuit, but instead we'd have to face up to our responsibilities and return home to my chainsaw children with the milk. Despite receiving high-speed acupuncture most of the time, I could confidently complete the first half of the cabin with minimum hassle. When Dr. Salvador arrives, we lure him upstairs to the bedroom under the allure of a good time, instead performing a magic trick where we make this knife disappear inside his throat. We then use the ladder to focus on hitting the kill trigger for the next phase, which is where this all gets really spicy. With the brute and the 2 Bella sisters arriving, my agoraphobia was reaching critical levels, but with the patience of Colleen Rooney, the 15 more resets that I suffered here didn't dampen my spirits. I'd found that the art of the blade was one that required finesse, not just flashy shows of our non-existent skills. Areas like this were a war of attrition, and attrition was founded on patience. Once the Rebecca Vardy twins were in here, we would move into a holding pattern around the cabin. We'd start by jumping off the top floor balcony, which would lure everyone back downstairs. We'd take a wide angle back up to the stairs, hit the balcony again, and repeat. This kept the Chainsaw Sisters and the brute in a constant path that we could predict, giving us enough time to begin thinning out the rest of the crew around the cabin. With numbers dwindling, we could then use the recovery time enemies had from jumping off the balcony to deal a small amount of damage before repeating the cycle again. And whilst this was atrociously tedious, hazardous, and not reliable by any stretch of the imagination, it was regrettably the best that I had. The repeated chainsaw ASMR applied directly into my ears, and the constant echoes of Louise shouting, "This one's on me," were beginning to make me tweak, but suddenly we unexpectedly broke through the chainsaw front line. Whilst downstairs, we get a stroke of luck where one of the chainsaw sisters lands perfectly on top of the hammer brute's inbound swing that was heading straight for our forehead. With her tanking it on our behalf, it stuns her, launching us into an attack that immediately cancelled her subscription to life. This was huge, but the fight was nowhere near done. The balcony cycle went on and on for nearly half an hour. Often I'd miss out on damage because of these plagas or bad cycles, other times I'd avoid death by single frames or complete blind luck. These minutes seemed to last for hours, but our persistence grinds us down to one singular chainsaw lady left. Despite this woman trying to taunt us upstairs into the cabin cut chair to get our nipples chainsawed off, I didn't fall for her lies. Eventually, after dragging her out, she resumes her route around the cabin, and with her deflated, the arrival of Ashley was something that should have been made into a national holiday. Arriving at Chapter 6 may have come at a great personal cost, but sunken cost fallacy dictated that I would need to be happy about this. On leaving the cabin, I regretted letting slip to Luis about the large amount of cake that Mendes had in his loft, because 10 seconds later he mysteriously heads off in that direction, leaving us to board the Fisting Express to the checkpoint by ourselves. The Ashley backpack strategy we discovered in our permadeath run gave us the edge at clearing out the first area, but after trying to grab the checkpoint crank, this was where the real challenge began. The cabin was like wine tasting in southern France in comparison to this garbage. I'd naively thought that patience like in the cabin would get us through here, but between being turned into a cheese and pineapple party snack or having Ashley arrive randomly to destroy the only good run I'd had in an hour, we were getting wrecked. Even slipping our Crocs from defense mode into sports mode made no difference, and our 12 resets showed that there was still infinite more possibilities to end our runs here. The main pain point here and in many other areas throughout this challenge was the sheer time investment we need to make. This run here, as an example, had taken me 23 minutes of precise care and love, before just getting cucked by some absolute bullshit. In a state of pure delirium, caused mainly in part to the egregious amount of alcohol I'd been forced to consume to deal with this section, I'd begun wandering around the checkpoint, aimlessly stumbling around the place looking for answers. And it wasn't until I got the toaster out of the cupboard, planning on enjoying a nice hot bath, that I received the first case of Berserker Mod Mandela effect. When I permadeathed this piece of gaming excrement originally, I'm sure this area was blocked off. There was a massive box in the way, meaning you couldn't leave this area, but for whatever reason the blockade wasn't here anymore, allowing me to double back on myself and take advantage of this Men in Black style neuralizer line. Every time I walked past this exact point here, the enemies would forget I ever existed, allowing me to stab their helpless bodies until they ceased to exist. Was this cheap? Yeah. Did I care at this point? No. With the Bella sisters defeated, we also get access to the typewriter, and with our progress secured, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I could now work in peace, thinning out the remainder of the forces in the checkpoint at my own pace, and with JJ the last enemy sent to the depths of hell, it was finally over. But in reality, was it really ever over? Before we'd even had a chance to change out of our freshly soiled diapers, we were immediately force-fed our next serving of video game food poisoning as Big Daddy catches up to us. Apparently not taking kindly to us sharing the secrets of his attic out, the run through here with nothing but our knife was looking bleak. But would you believe me if I said I made it on my second try? And the only reason I died the first time was because Ashley got down 4 frames before I entered the cutscene. With a very rare win for Team Us, many of you may believe that I would stoop so low as to skip the Mendes boss fight by morphing inside the merchant's desk. Well, you know, I ain't no bitch. Although on reflection writing this, I wish I was. Mendes reveals to us every chiropractor's worst nightmare, and despite 2 brutes making the opening gambit quite awkward with them taken out, Mendes could be easily dispatched in the same way as El Gigante was. Second stage Mendes is only slightly more difficult. With the plagas behind us cleared out, we just had to avoid the flaming planks of wood being thrown at us, and our initial concerns about the red barrels are negated by simply climbing up the ladder as they're being wound up by Mendes. Feeling like we were playing Metal Gear Rising, we finally call an ambulance for Mendes, which conveniently could swing up the road to grab us moments later.
I don't know.
This chainsaw-wielding digital terrorist stood between us and the safety of the castle, and let me tell you, this was a very unfun experience. If I went to my therapist with this clip and showed it to them, they'd immediately section us under the Mental Health Act, and even though the merchant skip was looking more and more appealing, off we went to beat Mendes for a second time. Arriving back for another crack of the whip, we instead tried luring Salvador back to this fence, and with an unbelievably tight, frame-perfect, completely luck-based dive between his chainsaw and said fence, we'd managed to put a minute amount of distance between us and the possibility of hitting a trifecta of Mendes boss fights. You'd better believe that I remained very tense all the way up to the castle, but with a surprisingly clear set of underwear for once, the bridge of the castle was raised to draw a close on our Chapter 6 anxiety. The arrival at the Neverland Ranch brought with it a new assault on the human psyche. The small beacon of good news was that we were 4 spinels away from purchasing the body armor. The bad news was that we had to fight our way through the equivalent of Afghanistan to get to the main hall. The cannons being in constant use were giving me serious sensory overload, and between trying and failing to defend myself, Ashley being flattened like that one orc outside Minas Tirith, or constantly having to stop her being dragged off to look at the puppies in this guy's van, this place was straight up poo. A sacrifice of 5 resets finally gifts us the RNG needed to avoid flaming death from above, and knowing that we were only supposed to blow the bloody doors off, we used the ladder next door to prey on the astounding Anakin Skywalker levels of arrogance these zealots had against someone who had the high ground. Once through, we make no acknowledgement of the welcome party, but at the cost of being rude, we'd now secured our progress at the typewriter by the thinnest of margins. After making our save, we could now relax and share a martini with the welcome party, before we're greeted by Salazar, the second-in-command fart-sniffing crony of Sadler, who requested that we return the Emperor's daughter to him immediately. We'd be more than happy to talk release if he could talk price.
You can give us the girl because you're not worth a penny, I'm afraid. You can die.
We seemed to be slightly off in our valuation of Ashley. I probably would have settled at 2 pennies, but before we can organise a rebid, Salazar's repo men arrived to forcibly remove Ashley from our custody. Just like Smashmouth prophesies, the years start coming and they don't stop coming. But in our case, the years were replaced with aggressive spankings. The success of this challenge was already hanging by a pubic hair made out of the single green herb that I had to my name. And when I realised that we couldn't escape Verdugo by shot-putting Ashley over the wall, I began to slowly slip into what was a long-anticipated K-hole. Verdugo, an absolute menace in hand-to-hand combat, wanted us to fight him with nothing more than our knife and a single green herb. I was about ready to blow my load and call it a night, but I was like a functioning alcoholic when it came to handling the aids this game was throwing at me, and I refused to concede defeat. A moment on the lips, forever on the hips was true for us all, even Verdugo, who was regrettably too big to fit between the pillar and the merchant's table. By standing here, the pillar acts as protection from the majority of his attacks, allowing us to sneak in for a precise slice or two whilst he was in his recovery animation. Just like every other fight, it was painfully slow, to the point where this was surely the gaming equivalent of being waterboarded. We had to really concentrate here, even with the merchant freaking out next to me the whole time. But 6 resets and a long and tedious 42 minutes later, Verdugo takes a final stab to the face and hits the deck like Neville Longbottom. Victory aside, complimentary foul deeds awaited us down in the dungeon where blindness was on a limited time offer. You too could have your eyes removed for the one-off cost of nothing. The hazardous conditions down here were sadly nothing new, but with the benefit of 11 resets under my belt, I'd become nothing short of the David Attenborough of Garradors. With these two still being able to see with their ears, knowing what patterns to look for and what movements to predict would give us maximum potential to avoid being divided by 2. I'd quickly realised that the unique knife stab animation was silent, meaning that we could remain undetected as we looked for the right opportunities to maximise our damage to them and minimise the amount of time we spent in here. At the cost of over half an hour of precision application of our knives to the Garrador's G-spots, we'd finally retrieved the dungeon key along with a charm for 20% increase to our knife crit rate, which was pretty poggers. But nothing kills charm arousal more than failing this challenge. In order to release the sword to complete this puzzle, we'd need to hit the gongs hidden behind this cage. And without the tools to do so, this is where we hit the first failure of the run. Whilst it upset me, I did have a collection of flash grenades stockpiled that I used to hit the gongs, opening the door, but still sadly sliding that first failure up onto the board. And I do hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it only gets worse from here. Stepping out into Mount Vesuvius, the first phase of the waterhole was quickly beaten by using the neuralizer line here to deal free, uncontested damage like the little rat was. After that, we collect the halo wheel from downstairs, and repeating step 1 gets us to the second failure of the run. But just before we got there, as we slaughtered these crossbowers in an act of violence that would be described in a court of law as justice.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
I wanted to share with you a little routine I'd created for when I was low on health. Now, if we ever found ourselves on critically low HP with no available heals in our inventory, rather than have us walk around like drunk Nico Bellic the whole time, the game feels sorry for how pathetic we were and drops us a guaranteed herb. How nice of them. But in true late-stage capitalist fashion, I could take advantage of their kindness by leaving the herb they gifted me on the floor, going to the next vase and begging for another herb, before doing it again, and again, and again. And I'd found that I could repeat this process of herb duplication up to around 7 herbs before they started despawning. I'd devolved into nothing more than a street beggar. You know, like the ones in London who pretend to be on crutches but then walk off into their Aston Martin at the end of the day. But I would wear that label like a badge of honour if it meant getting some free heals. The karma for our herb fraud is felt as failure 2 enters the chat. Because we can't send ourselves up here to turn the 2 cracks, we have to send Ashley, who, donning her Morpheus sunglasses to protect her delicate eyes, can crank the first platform up before we get one of the zealots to carry her over to the second one. We'd then need to flash multiple times to stop her from being abducted or pulled off the second crank, but with that task failed successfully, failure 3 then arrives as we have to flash the Salazar flamethrower heads in order to destroy them and clear the path through to chapter 7. Unofficial failure 4 then occurs when a 20-year-old daughter of privilege manages to steal our knife, slice our hand off, and escape. Cringe. Newly single, we get a reprieve by getting to stuff as much raw fish as we could carry into our attacher case, and finally, we had enough spinels to trade for the coveted body armor. The protection of my virginity was immediately paying for itself as we were able to quickly exercise the Red Zealot's demons and take advantage of the Golden Knight's lorry-sized turning circle in this corridor.
You can stop right there, Leon. Wouldn't make me use this, would you?
I recognize your footsteps, old man.
He?
You, yeah.
I'm a female.
After getting off to a great start by misgendering her footsteps, we're introduced to Ada, a mysterious assassin in the employ of House Sadler. Her true motives were shrouded in mystery, but she soon reveals her angle.
Leave the girl. She's lost no matter what. You walk away now, and who knows? Maybe you'll live to meet me again. And then I might get you that greeting you were looking for.
Jesus, you do not need to tell me twice. Give me 2 seconds. Let me just grab my... And just like that, like most women in my life who were out of my league, we were ghosted from within the same room. And to top it all off for our troubles, we're also immediately forced into failure 4 of the run by having to use a grenade to lower this drawbridge. Lame. Things continue on a downhill trajectory as we get hit with some absolute BS from the armoured El Gigante, but by continuing to raise Salazar's home insurance premiums by blowing holes in his castle, we finally catch up to Ashley. We sat down with her and told her that she didn't need to hand herself back into her dad. What happened to Leon's family had nothing to do with her. She couldn't be held accountable for her father's actions. Just in the same way Leon couldn't hold his father responsible for his disturbing lack of riz and crippling addiction to anime.
Who wants their balls crushed?
Me?
I promised her that things were only going to get better from here. Once in the maze, this promise aged like a fine milk, thanks in part to special guest retina damage from Fade Krauser, a regrettable incident of parricide, and some pretty traumatizing dog euthanasia. But with the 3 flags lowered, we could arrive ready to start the grand haul. Now, completion of the Chimera puzzle brings with it some of the most malignant areas imaginable, and after duping some more herbs to help ease the clapping my cheeks were about to receive, I decided to throw myself into the toughest area out of the 3. Our chances of getting out of here alive rested on our ability to hit our perfect parries. If we could, one deflection would get the knights' helmets off and another would give us the chance to knife them in the plaga and renounce their physical form. However, a brain score of an 81-year-old Alzheimer's patient on Dr. Kawashima's brain training was apparently responsible for my 4 business day reaction times. But a few resets deep and I was sufficiently warmed up, becoming a composer of perfect knight deflections. With the Garradors arriving, their indiscriminate murder of everything in here was a huge help. I mean, seriously, kudos to them for not seeing, well, anything at all. Their help fast-tracks us to the only remaining task of this area. Wait, haven't we been here before? For our perfect dismantling of the Garradors, we bagged the Striker Charm for an additional 9% movement speed, and despite having not actually completed the Goat's Head room properly since my first ever playthrough, I was surprised at how well this room went. Ashley's constant abductions gave us plenty of insta-kill opportunities, and eventually with the right timings we could make it up to this ladder, forming an orderly queue for everyone to be knifed into the afterlife. Sitting down for a quick asbestos sandwich with Ashley gives us access to the snakehead, and with only a quick change of the bedsheets needed to complete the puzzle, it was suddenly as if the game could sense my hubris. With a secret trap sprung, Ashley becomes separated from us, leaving her alone to run through the long corridors of the mausoleum whilst we entered the Messiah flow state outside the Chimera puzzle. And whilst we were using the enemies in here like ventriloquist dummies, I'd forgotten about one very critical part of this level. This wasn't just a trap, it was torture. It felt personal, as if this was punishment for all my cheesing at the checkpoint in the waterhole. Karma or no, I cannot express into words just how much deep, unknown rage this section generated inside of me. Taking on a Garrador inside the space of a shoebox was a challenge in itself, but doing so whilst a crossbow firing range shot us continually without us being able to do anything about it just was not the one. Sometimes I'd be stun-locked in place, stuck in an endless assault on my senses. Others, I was interrupted seconds before hitting the Garrador, resulting in me being blasted off my feet. The resets flowed like wine, and every shot to my poor, delicate Christian body felt like it was penetrating my soul. The main problem was that there was no blind spot or any part of this cage that was safe. These filthy little cheeses were positioned in the perfect triangle, meaning breaking sight with one crossbower simply put you in the crosshairs of the other 2. The only method I'd found that had some success was constantly moving around the cage and hitting crouch. Dropping it like it's hot would allow us to duck under a percentage of the total crossbow bolts sent our way, and by also moving tight to the outer walls and using the Chimera statue for cover, we at least removed one crossbower from play, but none of this was a guarantee. Even with inhalation of this weapons-grade hopium, we'd cranked out 17 resets and made no progress. With the sound of my cheeks being clapped apparently audible from the other side of the castle.
Where's the satisfying sound of one's impairment?
The main crux of our brick wall here was that our available healing pool looked like a vegan child's lunchbox, severely limiting how long we could last in here. On our next death, the visions of the future became clearer now. Our enemies were all around us, and in so many of these futures, these 4 prevailed. But I did see a way. There was a narrow way through. I just needed more. I made a tactical load just before completing the Chimera puzzle and headed back to the main hall. I purposefully lowered our health here and took care of the Red Zealots therapy group, and by using their drops of herbs, the crates I'd left behind, and beating back a series of knights that I'd left untouched from earlier for their spinels, we re-entered the fight with 6 green herbs, 1 green and red herb, 1 large bass, 2 small basses, and enough spinels to purchase a first aid spray. An inventory glow-up if ever there was one. And whilst the additional health made no difference to how much this section made me want to put my head through the nearest window, what it did mean is that I could brute force my way through here using my previous strategies, and on my 21st attempt in what had seemed like an impossible task. I felt like I had a new lease of life. I'd finally been granted my freedom back, and the only thing I could think about doing after leaving this prison, apart from making the most important save of my life, was...
You got nothing on me, yo. Hey, you hear me? I got nothing to say. I told you, you can call me.
Recomposing ourselves after becoming the crossbow version of Ted Bundy, the focus shifted to replenishing our health stores ready for our fight through the ballroom. Down in the mausoleum, there was no sign of Ashley, but we could collect some additional spinels from the knights and use my elevator strategy to embarrass the big golden one. With that additional payday, we now had 13 spinels, which could have got us free first aid sprays, but you know what's better? The rich Corinthian leather of the red attaché case. This bad boy would not only boost Leon's sex appeal by 45%, but would increase our drop rate for red herbs, giving us practically a free full heal each time, which in comparison would pay off against the first aid sprays in just 3 drops. Entering the ballroom, the Novistadors, like most enemies, were susceptible to being stun-locked 1v1. In a group, however, they become a little more annoying, so with the additional speed granted by the Striker Charm and our Crocs moved into sports mode, we managed to unlock the drawbridge door without having to spend half a day fighting these flying rats, and with a quick note for failure 5 of the run, we arrive at the Garrador blockade. Now, many of us may have been filling our fortnight wife runs at the thought of fighting 4 Garradors at once, but after the hell that was the Chimera prison, this fight was an absolute pleasure to take in comparison. Fighting the Zealots down here keeps the Garradors nice and pacified, and once we'd awakened them from their blind slumber, we simply used their preferred greeting of touching everyone's faces to our advantage. Running would alert the Garradors to our presence, but I'd found that by tapping shift it gave us an injection of speed without the trade-off of alerting the Los Illuminados Paralympic team. The additional free movement speed got us out of jail several times, and whilst the stakes were high as any death would send us right back to the start of all this, our ascension to becoming the Lisan al Gaib had begun. By chaining together hits in a series of slick combos, we closed the eyelids of the last remaining Garrador. We finally find Ashley being force-fed the Baron's dirty bathwater, and our protests have us thrown down into the cave system below the castle. In preparation for what was about to come, we again take some purposeful damage to maximise our herb harvesting potential, ready for the Verdugo rematch. Learning from his mistake, he'd chosen his arena wisely, opting for somewhere that had no pillars or desks. With the nitrogen showers disabled, we would have to pull up our big boy pants and face our fears by going one-on-one with him. As expected, sketchiness was at an all-time high as we fought around this very limited arena, but by using the square in the middle here, we move in for opportune stabs at Verdugo's head whilst he was in his recovery animation, doing enough damage to send him slithering back up the sewer like Pennywise.
Hiya, Georgie.
It was now just a case of collecting this first aid spray and the absolutely felony quantities of red herbs in here as we bided our time for the lift to arrive. En route to the surface, the visions were becoming more and more clearer. Leon could see his bloodline written across time. Sadler was our grandfather, meaning that Fade Krauser was our cousin. At this point, we might as well have been Lannisters, but the cruel reality is that we were Sadlers. So this is how we'd survive, by being Sadlers. Maybe not literally being Sadler. We could probably just settle for killing him, maybe? With Luis's magic serum boosting our very low vibes, the first task in the mines was to retrieve the dynamite to clear this cave-in. To stop us from getting through here, Super Salvador had taken personal responsibility for the dynamite, which, with just a knife, left us with a net zero chance at getting this back. It looked to be checkmate. But by dragging Super Salvador over to the entrance to the cave, we can sit right on top of the neuralizer line here for this area. Its convenient placement meant that 1 second he'd be frothing at the mouth, ready to split us in half, and the next, completely forgetting what he was doing here. This whole process took an egregious amount of time and gave me more anxiety than I'd care to admit. But our dedication meant that we'd managed to retrieve the dynamite without ever having to set foot back in the rest of the mines. But I should have known, as always, what the game giveth, it also taketh away. and shoves it straight up our arsehole. The double El Gigante room was pure misery, converted into gaming form. Not only had I forgotten about them removing the control unit, preventing us from dropping them into the lava below, the enemy numbers into this area were off the charts, and right on cue to backwash our freshly poured Ribena was the armoured El Gigante, who was invulnerable to knife damage. He does have a small vulnerable area on his exposed face, but with only a knife that may as well have been on the moon. Despite the inevitable failure on the horizon, I still spent an amount of time that was probably far more than appropriate working out a configuration to beat as much of this room as possible with just my knife. An action that I hoped would go some way to making it up to you all. Overall, we have 6 waves of enemies that spawn in from the roof, all extremely keen to get down here and further depreciate my quality of life. For now, we were basically ignoring the El Gigantes. They would just be an aggressive and threatening side character as we went about cleaning up the area. Instead, our focus would be on preserving the lives of the 3 dynamite Ganados that arrive in 3 of those cycles, and it was no exaggeration to say that they were the only way we were getting out of here. With their arrival, the arena turned into a Modern Warfare hardcore lobby, something that we had to take advantage of. Despite unlocking new and obscure ways for Luis to die in what was the most scuffed strategy known to man, after 10 or so minutes, the Dynamites would have cleared out the area of enemies for us. And with them thanked for their service, after 15 minutes, the actual boss fight could finally start.
Now we can finally play the game.
If somehow we could defy the odds to even make it to this stage at all, there was a huge amount of pressure to beat this area a la Toot Sweet, or risk having to do it all again. The problem, because there always would be one, is that the furnace area doubled up as a swingers club. At various points when we were mid-fight with the unprophylacticated El Gigante, he would just straight up leave us to go and fist another man. Whilst I'm not opposed to trying something new, this trade was probably up there as the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals. As we couldn't do any damage to the armoured El Gigante, anytime he'd focus us, we'd lose out on a significant amount of progress, forced instead to devolve into nothing more than a running simulator. But once we had the attention of our wife back, we could stand up from the proverbial smelting cuck chair and continue with our plan. I won't share with you the amount of time that this took me out of pure embarrassment, but somewhere in the region of 2 hours to 3 weeks, I'd finally got the breakthrough I'd been looking for. With fear of choking this run now gripping me by the delicate areas of my body, herein lies the 2 failures of this section. Ignoring the 2 obvious chainsaw-related problems we now had, we A, wouldn't be able to hit the dynamite Luis places on its back with our knife, and B, couldn't do any damage after this to get him to fall to the ground. Thus, we incur failure 6 by using a grenade to blow the dynamite, and 7 by using a flash grenade to get him down to the floor, further ruining what was once a promising gaming spectacle. With absolutely nothing left in the tank and on -1 health, Uruk-hai Captain Lurtz was miraculously defeated, thanks solely to the flash grenades, and with Luis launched over this wall, we desperately limped around the arena waiting for him to unlock the door, which would reveal our path through to a typewriter. With yet another most important save of our life secured, we take a moment to relax and head on through to enjoy a shortcut to my breaking point. Arriving at the Novi's home, we find Pasanta waiting for us, and with Pasanta comes an infinite supply of Novistadors. I tested this, and there is no end to them, and I'm going to be real with you homies, I just can't. Pasanta, I could deal with. Infinite Novistadors showing up with super soakers all filled up with their own diarrhea? No. Maybe we weren't the one. Maybe the prophecy of the Lisan al Gaib was nothing more than a fairy tale. But with only enough health to season a portion of spaghetti bolognese, rags that were LARPing as body armor, and an apparently unmatched ability at pressing continue low checkpoint at unbelievable speeds, I had neither the health nor the willpower to see how quickly things can go from a thumbs up moment to a thumb up your ass moment. Letting you guys down is not a feeling familiar to my vocabulary, but please rest assured I was losing my goddamn mind. I wasn't throwing in the towel though, all I did was use my flash grenades to expel the Novistadors from the arena, leaving me and you free to tango together in peace. Whilst the lack of health meant this fight was far more difficult than it needed to be, after committing Pasanta's movesets to memory, our parrying abilities had grown exponentially. By keeping her in close quarters, we reduced her movesets down to just the hand slash, which we could continually parry. Followed up with several knife slashes to the face, we would prepare for another parry and repeat the cycle. With the Novis flashed away before they'd even set foot in here, we'd wait until we were one shot before opening one of the 3 crates in the arena for herbs, and despite the continued breakdown in rule structure, we Thanos snapped her out of existence. Before I then Thanos snapped myself out of existence when I became the only person in Resident Evil history to die to these traps.
I shit on you though.
A further 11 resets folded very carefully into the smallest size possible, soaked in olive oil and inserted into our rectum. We catch up to Luis at the lift and thanked him for his continued support.
Feel free to step in any time.
Did all right?
But never shout at the people you love. You never know when a long-lost family member will show up and shank them in the back. we revealed to Krauser what we'd learned, that he was in fact our cousin.
Cousin. Is that right?
After an hour of deflecting RE4Rs abuse, we'd been warmed up to red-hot levels for the Krauser fight. Our knifing ability had ascended to a level previously unobtainable, and despite a few slip-ups, we slapped that bald head all the way back to the lobby. With Luis going out 420 blazing it and Chapter 12's comforting touch felt for the first time, the clock tower's winding staircase was illuminated with the help of the world's most narcissistic flamethrower. For us, it also saves us the job of having to bother fighting any of the enemies here, turning this area into Costco's rotisserie chicken counter and allowing us to make a quick start to the lift section. With the primary goal of the lift usually being to stop enemies from jumping on, having only a knife was inherently counterintuitive to this goal. We're forced to make several stops on the way up, whilst also being placed into an almost permanent state of mental discomfort, all the way to the top. And with these crossbow enemies putting me on the verge of having a PTSD-induced stroke from the Chimera room, I was honestly having such a lovely time here. Eventually, high-speed returns to the ground floor were provided at will, and if we could rapidly slice any potential head poppers before they're converted, we'd remove another serious headache of dealing with the plagas whilst on here. With that, the rest of the journey up became a test of mental resolve more than anything else, and upon arriving, a quick cycle of enforced damage allows us to maximize our herb duplication as we entered Salazar's altar.
Such a fool, Mr. Kennedy, to have been bestowed with Lord Sattler's
Silence!
mongrel!
With Salazar doing his best Quaid start the reactor impression, his destructive set of attacks, the 33 plagas that arrived throughout this fight, and my clear overestimation of my raw ability in this game was resulting in us receiving nothing short of a hernia to the brain. On a scale of 1 to North Korea, I was really not having a good time here, and as we accrued our 23rd reset of this boss fight, I'd like you to join me quickly for a story that takes us back to Chapter 4. Now, up until now, that golden egg wet dream from earlier seemed random and didn't really make a lot of sense, but now, stood where we were, it suddenly all became very clear. The Berserker Mod Mandela effect had returned here for one last coup de grace. In my last challenge on this mod, Salazar's dangerous allergy to a golden egg suppository was apparently no longer existent. Because of this, I'd sold my golden egg for the quest back in Chapter 4 and raw dogged the other on the way up the lift. This complete contempt I harboured for these 14-carat unfertilised embryos had unwittingly crippled my run. For, in another case of unbridled desperation, I'd replayed the lift, saving one of the golden eggs to use on Salazar to see if I was truly right about its effects. And guess what? It turns out I was wrong.
No. Wait. Wait.
Why did I even try it? I should have just finished this challenge now, disgraced as a failure instead of this. But now, knowing the truth, I'd become the Resident Evil version of the guy who bought a pizza with 10k Bitcoin. I'd ruined this for all of us. Even with one golden egg depleting nearly half of Salazar's health without us having to lift a finger, it still wasn't enough to break out of this nightmare. They say you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, but apparently you can break a man's spirit by not making an omelette at all. With over 2 hours of attempts getting absolutely nowhere, I came to realise that the only difference between me and the Bitcoin pizza guy was that I could still change the future. Knowing how all of this unfolded, by returning to the past and listening to the visions, Leon could now do what needed to be done. Now, you may think that I was insane for rolling back 8 chapters of progress, but for me, I could live with this, just about. To paint this insanity out for you in a way that made sense, I'd rather take an hour detour that allowed me to keep driving than sit in standstill traffic for an hour. And I mean, if we use the Salazar situation as an example, it would be like having a percentage chance that you would never leave that traffic jam. Something about making progress was easier to swallow for me than desperately trying to make the Salazar fight work. So whilst repeating this V-Bucks credit card scam for a second time made me physically ill, knowing that the 2 golden eggs would choke the life out of Salazar and clear our path to the start of the island was the only thing that kept me going. One bonus was that with the loss of the free spin-outs from completing the Golden Egg quest, with our improved skills we'd managed to save 3 Vipers worth of health for the Viper Hunter quest, netting us a +1 spin-out profit. Repeating some of this made me feel like I was dying of consumption, but after plenty of breaks and being edged to completion in just under 19 hours, it was like we'd never left. And even though Salazar still certainly gave us a run for our money, cleaning up the leftovers of his health was supremely achievable, and after a delay of 5 additional days, the detour to Chapter 4 pays off as we finally feel the fresh open water as Ada drops us off over to the island. With her feelings towards Ashley's future evidently changing, she drops us off hot on the heels of Krauser. As per usual, our post-boss fight inventory was left looking like Ian Beale's bank account, but again, using a combo of the Neuralizer line here and the Skynet defense turrets, we're able to quickly wipe out the RE4Rs Berserker, who were his most elite and feared forces. Admittedly, having to use our face as a minesweeper was less than ideal, but constant repairs to our body armor kept us looking fresh. With Ashley locked away behind a key-carded door, we entered Mendez's production line of caked-up playthings to locate a suitably coded card. Downstairs in the Regenerador Hall of Fame, with a lack of top rail to fit the biosensor scope to our knife, we'd need to resort to a more technically superior method of elimination to find the wrench.
My mother told me to pick the very best lock. And you understand this? Oh, you did.
After releasing the Chosen One from his cryosleep, both its first and second Iron Maiden phases can be big cheesed by just jumping over the window and back again here for free damage, and would you believe it? Our attempts to upgrade the keycard were met with a strong resistance from the lab's Sardaukar team, but by taking a wide line and forcing our way back through this door, we can make it to the merchant for a quick save and room reset, making the return trip just a simple snatch and grab of the upgraded keycard from the terminal. With Ashley now back on the team, Chapter 14's main goal was getting to this lift, and between us and that was a lot. The first task was to clear out downstairs and the smelting room, which would give us access through to the sewers, where Ashley getting concussion on the way through could easily be resolved by hitting the next room along to reset all of the enemy positions. Now, there is definitely more than one arch nemesis in this run, but this one was its final form. Whilst I have always struggled here because I apparently have the hand-eye coordination of someone with no hands or eyes, right now was make or break time. With no typewriter here and no desire to knife fight an Iron Maiden or repeat all of this again, I'd need to rush in and hit this switch first time. The stakes had never been higher. I'd need to set aside all of my previous failures and channel the Lisan al Gaib from within. We entered the room, we get Ashley in place, wind up the switch and... fuck. Having nearly 600 hours in this game and still having no understanding of how this devilry works, we finally make it through on our first attempt.
That was a lie.
By hitting the power button to the garbage area, aka the visual representation of my skill level, sprinting back as soon as we regain control of Leon means that we can make it across the bridge before Ashley gets abducted and cuts us off, saving her in the process and safely making it to the wrecking ball section, which was conveniently about to wreck my life. Due to constraints in the laws of physics, the knife doesn't help in breaking the wall open early, and neither does using enemy dynamite or rocket launchers, so it was shaping up that we were going to have to last out this section in its entirety. After turning this place into a Jackson Pollock painting for the 8th time, there was truthfully no strategy to this place. It was a lawless land, and the most success I got was from just running around in a circle, praying to Jesus that these guys blew themselves up and that I got good RNG to rescue Ashley. In all honesty, the real challenge was trying not to have an actual fit when I got blown up moments before making it out of there. Eventually, the area just required another sacrifice of time, and on our 17th attempt, we were gifted the God Run. We ran back through that hole in the wall as if our life depended on it, which, in all honesty, it did. Leaving Ashley still in the bulldozer, but with the beautiful stamps of the typewriter keys securing our progress, we could finally breathe. With this hell put behind us, before heading up the lift, I thought I'd check downstairs out to see if I could get the 8 spin-outs for the Walking Dread quest, but maybe we'd be fine without it. With the Emperor cornering us and using the voice on Leon to subdue him before grounding Ashley, we set off right behind them before we're stopped by a familiar face.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
Despite being a cheating little bitch, who could blame him? Our knifing skills had far exceeded his own, and after slowly making our way through his assault course of autism, we arrive at the penultimate showdown with our cousin. For old time's sake, we're issued out another migraine in this area, as the menage a trois of a Hammer Brute and JJ in Krauser's arena goes just about how you'd imagine it would. Racking up 6 resets here was painful. With no save point before entering this arena, I needed to make every attempt in here count. Not like this one, or this one, or that one, or this one actually. If we preserved as much body armor en route through as we could, maximized input from the Brute's hammer into Krauser's face and stayed away from JJ like the plague, we could make our 1v1s with Krauser count, leaving him with no option but to reveal his secret weapon.
Here! Oh! Take my hand! Ah! Come on!
Whilst at first quite funny, when we arrived at the main arena, his weird hand configuration threw me off so much I couldn't parry a single attack. This was clearly a skill diff, but I didn't fancy doing all of this again, so I opted instead for the longer, safer strategy of just going up and down the ladder. This took ages, but with all of our progress here on the line, it felt worth the cheese. But even with the cheese, Krauser had still ground us down to our final health point, which, just before I killed over from stress,
Just fun. I tried it.
and one fewer family member to invite to Christmas, we arrived at chapter 15, one chapter away from closing out this PTSD shitstorm. The unhealthy prospect of fighting through this army of smoothbrains was one that made my eyes water, but it was made significantly more appealing thanks to this universe's version of Duncan, Idaho. Mike's Turbo Vulcans were basically a cheat code, and all I had to do was sit back and wait for him to finish. All over this place. Even though we invoke failure 8 of the run by having to destroy the AA turret with a grenade, watching Mike absolutely obliterate these cretins was like poetry. I was watching art be produced right in front of my eyes. With Mike reaching his recommended daily allowance of war crimes, it was now up to us to open the next gate, all by ourselves. Despite the challenge this presented, frequent trips back to the merchant to repair our body armor and slicing enemies one at a time really helped to make this area bearable. On one of our trips back though, we find something we never expected to see again, on the floor amongst the piled up bodies. Our father's ducal signet. Apparently someone had bought it off the merchant, and miraculously that person had been murdered by Mike at our very feet. Against all odds, it looked as though the preservation of the Atreides family heritage was back on the menu, boys. Making one last desperate run through to the second switch to open the gate, we hit the typewriter up ahead, before getting killed in the cutscene. Mike goes down with the ship and we make a pre-save before starting our run through to the Citadel. Sadler was throwing all of his remaining Sardaukar and the kitchen sink at us in a last-ditch attempt to stop us from reaching him. But one severe miscalculation from him was underestimating just how desperate I'd become after spending nearly 48 hours trying to beat this challenge. Now, the way that most Skynet Terminator home defense systems worked is that if something goes into its red laser grid, it dies. Pretty self-explanatory, right? But what happens if two things go into it at the same time? Well, you get something that looks a little like this. Because the Novistador pushes me into the red laser grid, it enters it just before I do, drawing the focus of the turret but pushing me through in the process. The turret shoots the Novistador, but if we were quick enough, it doesn't register me, allowing us to walk on through without having to do any of this. Perhaps the prophecy had been right all along. I didn't want to believe it, but after what we just witnessed, how couldn't we be the Lisan al Gaib? I won't say I was annoyed. I just firmly believed at this point that if I tried to repeat what had just happened, it would never happen again. 6 more enforced errors later, and I'd replicated the once-in-a-lifetime moment and made it through to Ashley. Sadler uses the voice on us, restraining Leon as he lectures him about why he killed his father. But before we could get an answer, Ada shows her true allegiance and gives Leon the seconds he needed to break out of Sadler's grasp and pull Ashley out of there. All that remained now was revenge. We tell Sadler that his daughter would remain safe, free to roam the fields along with the other animals, but Sadler, he'd have to answer for Leon's father. We tell him to stand, or choose his champion. Sadler chooses to stand on all 4 of his fresh newborn legs. And so, the final fight begins. After scoping out the fight with a salt-based sprinkling of 10 resets, I'd found that there was a pretty safe cycle that we could use to our advantage. If we run in underneath his bodice and begin knifing Sadler's original body, specifically on his right-hand side. For whatever reason, he just won't move. Who knew why this happened, but I wasn't complaining. We could sit here and knife away without any retaliation. When he eventually collapses down, we can get a little bit more knifing in here, but as soon as he starts to get up, we'd need to move away to avoid his stomp attack. Once done, we'd move straight back in and repeat these steps, which would give us the absolutely best possible chance at defeating him without getting absolutely flattened. Most of the time, the accompanying Novistadors were trampled on by Sadler himself, and by sitting either at the start of the fight over here or on the far side of the arena, these positions kept us out of the range of Krauser's remaining turrets. With Sadler enjoying the equivalent of a nice trip to central London, the only thing that was really taking a pounding here was my wrist and index finger, both of which were being crippled with rheumatoid arthritis and carpal tunnel after doing this non-stop for the past 5 resets. But after an hour of aging my wrist by 40 years and inducing failure 9 with the red rocket launcher,
I'll give you a holy body.
with revenge finally achieved, Ada arrives to take the last remaining piece of my soul with her as a trophy before throwing us the jet ski keys to make our escape. And like that, it was finally over. for approximately 60 seconds, which is where we contracted our final helping of Berserker Mod AIDS. One particularly horrible thought was that if we didn't have the dodge ability, we would never have been able to finish this challenge. You need about 47 seconds to make it to the end of the jet ski section, and as you can't push past Super Salvador as he's doing this attack, the only option was to try and loop him back round into the garage, which would give you nowhere near the amount of time needed to get to the end of the game. Luckily, we had blessed ourselves with just the right amount of rules, and with 2 very specific rolls forward, we can squeeze past Sal, boot up the jet ski, and fly out of there. As Ashley stood there taking in the sun, Ashley said how grateful she was that she'd chosen the right side. But we knew, of all people, that there are no sides. And like that, we draw a close to one of the worst challenges I think I've ever had the displeasure of beating. This was borderline brain rot, so a huge shout out to anybody who made it this far, and thank you again for War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check War Thunder out, it's free to play, and for new and returning players who haven't played for 6 months, check out the pinned comment or the description for a massive bonus. I think for now, me and Resident Evil 4 Remake might need to see other people for a bit, so for our next challenge, we're going to be shooting some guns.
Right, what the hell kind of name is Soap, eh? How'd a muppet like you pass selection?